What is the 24th thing that I would do differently if I were going to college today? I would tour my college's museums and archives while I am still in college. Hi, I'm Passion Darby, and this month I am going to be sharing with you 31 things that I would do differently if I were going to college today. 31 years ago, I was an 18-year-old young woman and I decided that I was going to college no matter what. And I did go to college that fall. It was fall of 1993. So here I am, 31 years later, and I have amassed a vast amount of wisdom, knowledge, and experience that I will be sharing with college goers today through this channel. So, what is the 24th thing that I would do differently if I were going to college today? I would for sure take the time to tour the college's museums and archive centers while I am still a student there in college. So, I have some notes if you hear some rustling in the background so that I can share as much information with you as possible today. When I went to college, if you have listened to some of the earlier videos, you would know I attended for in undergrad three different historically black colleges and universities before ultimately graduating from Clark Atlanta University. And at Philander, there was not a campus museum. But what they have today is called the African American Art Collection. And if it sounds like I'm reading on this portion of the video, it's because I am. I typically am not reading, but I wanted to make sure I got these institutions right for the institution's sake. So at Philander, they now have a digital collection called the African American Art Collection. Of course, I could not take advantage of this because when I was in college, there was no internet. So there, of course, would not have been a digital collection. But what Philander did have that became historical was the fact that in 1993, which is the actual year that I enrolled at Philander Smith College as a freshman, their choir had sang, or is it sung? I think it's sung for President Bill Clinton's first inauguration, which is a really big deal. So that became part of their heritage and the history at Philander Smith College. And I'm sure now they have images of that performance or perhaps even recordings that they keep as part of their history. But those things were just underway when I was a freshman there. Moving on to Alabama State University, they had the Center for the Study of Civil Rights and African American Culture. And they also have the Selma to Montgomery March NPS Interpretive Center. Now, why would that have been important to me? Well, first of all, I'm embarrassed to say that this center, the Center for the Study for Civil Rights and African American Culture, was located in the campus's library. And I used to go to the library all the time. And so I feel like I just probably just walked right by the center and didn't even pay attention to it. So that's a little embarrassing for me. But it's important to me because I did attend all Black elementary schools and high schools growing up. So I was taught very much about the civil rights movement and the Montgomery bus boycott, among other types of African American history and heritage and culture. So it would have been ideal for me and educative to me for me to have visited that museum and kind of piggybacked off what I had already learned in my earlier education. Moving on to Clark Atlanta University, Clark has the Clark Atlanta University Art Museum and the AUC, which stands for Atlanta University Center, Woodruff Library Archives. But what's great about Clark is that it is on the same campus as Morehouse College and Spelman College, which also have great museums. So, Morehouse College has the Martin Luther King Jr. College archives, and they also have the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel. And then Spelman College has the Spelman Museum of Fine Art, and they also have the Spelman Archives. Now, all because I was a student at Clark Atlanta University, all of these facilities were accessible and free for me to use and to visit and to tour and to study. But sadly, I did not go to any of these institutions while I was enrolled at Clark Atlanta University, with the exception of the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel. And the only reason I went there is because there was a program there that I was required to attend for course credit. So it's not that I would not have gone or there I didn't want to go. It's just that I didn't know to go. I don't think I understood that those institutions were for me and available to me and part of my student experience. And I did not know that they were free to me. And I did not know that I could just walk in and utilize those resources. And I think that that is really on the I would say the responsibility or the shoulders of the administrators, like the orientation administrators and other administrators that help students understand what resources are on campus. So perhaps that they had helped me understand that not only those resources were available, but that I could access them when I wanted to, I probably would have visited those museums more often or at all. And so let me tell you why this is important to me and why I also think it should be important to you. Or better yet, why you should look to campus museums and to visit them while you are enrolled in college. So for me, and this may be the same for you, I grew up touring and visiting different museums in the Chicagoland area. My mother was a genius mother, if you ask me, but she was very, very good about taking my sisters and I throughout Chicago to visit museums, no matter what neighborhood it is. And if you all know this, or some of you all may not know this, but Chicago is probably, I think it's statistically the most segregated city in the nation, in the United States. But that didn't stop my mother. My mother took me and my sisters to all the museums that she could muster and all of the cultural centers that she could muster. So I grew up in that world, and it would have been helpful for me to continue that trajectory while I was in college. Also, as I stated earlier, I attended an elementary school where artistic expression was valued and expected among students. So we were expected to produce some art in some way, probably every day. Even if it was just public speaking or reciting a poem, we had to do it every day. And then the next reason why this is important to me is because at that same school, my elementary school, we learned a lot about Black history and culture. And to learn more about those things in college would have been a natural transition for me. And it would have been ideal for my advanced and informal learning. So I was already learning about those things when I was in elementary school. So it would have been just ideal for me to advance that education and to further my study of my own cultural and heritage, which is Black history and history, culture, and heritage. Next is it is included in the tuition cost. And I have talked to you all about this many times throughout this series. If you are going to pay tuition, you might as well leverage every penny of that tuition. So, since the services and the administrators are paid through your tuition costs, you might as well use that resource and visit those museums. Also, I had a lot more time when I was in college. Now I'm an adult and I don't have a lot of time to visit museums freely. But when I was in college, I had all the time in the world and I didn't even have to leave campus in order to do it. So you have to think about that. Also, a good college activities it's a good college activity to do with your friends. So me and my friends, we were always into art. My college friends, we were heavily into art. We were actually used to go to plays and musicals and things like that off campus. But why didn't we do those things on campus? I will never know. But don't make that mistake with your college friends. Make it a college friend date or even make it a romantic date if that's what you want to do. Also, it is an informal learning aspect, and I will teach you all more about the differences between formal, informal, and non formal learning later. But for now, understand that informal is learning outside of the classroom, whereas formal is learning inside the classroom. So, visiting a museum and interacting with the learning activities and exhibits within that museum opens up informal learning for you. Another reason it's important is because it adds to the co-curriculum opportunities for you. So you have your major, your academic major, but it can also be considered a co-curriculum learning opportunity that aids in your academic major or supplements your academic major or adds to your academic major or deepens the study of your academic major. Also, they may have alternating exhibits. So I think at my most recent graduate school, one of the exhibits that they had was something about at the African diaspora. Now they don't have exhibits like that often, so of course I would want to know that and I would want to go and visit that exhibit. So you just never know what exhibits are being displayed at the time, and going to the campus's museum offers you different opportunities to see those alternating exhibits, or I think they call them rotating exhibits. Also, think about the cultural aspect. Cultural, you may want to learn more about your own culture. Now, the museums and archive centers that I mentioned earlier at the institutions that I was enrolled in, those were all about my culture. So of course I should have gone. I would have learned so much because they all talked about or made exhibits about or curated artifacts regarding Black history and culture. So think about when you are ready to even choose a college, think, okay, do they have a museum that discusses my culture and help me to deepen my understanding of my own culture? And then also, the type of museums that are on campus, it says a lot about that college's heritage. So, of course, all of the museums that I mentioned earlier that are affiliated with my institutions that I was where I was enrolled, they are Black history and culture, but those are all also historically Black colleges and universities. So, if you choose a college where your culture is celebrated like I did or acknowledged like I did, then you would have the same experience. And then sometimes they also have guest speakers. You never know who might come. I think, oh, yes, I went to Bennett College once, which is located in Greensboro, North Carolina, I believe. And they had invited the poet Nikki Giovanni to speak at their campus's museum. The joy that that brought me because I love me some Nikki Giovanni. Love her. Okay. So you just never know what guest speakers are going to be invited to speak at the museum or to talk about their own art. And then also, if you are a art history or heritage studies major or minor, like I was in my most recent graduate study, visiting museums can only enhance that. Visiting museums can only give you more opportunities to understand those fields and those disciplines and how you can excel or be successful in those fields as well. And also, it could be a connection to your own heritage and history, kind of like what I talked about earlier. And that could be through the exhibits or just through the institution itself. So you may go to the campus archives and find some history about yourself that you may not even know. In fact, I was working on a project, I think about 2 years ago, and I had to sift through the digital archives and the digital yearbooks at Alabama State University. And guess who I saw in the yearbooks, in the 1994 yearbook? Me. So, and I also saw, I think I saw my father's name and I saw my mother's cousin's name from way back in the 70s, the 1970s. So you just never know what you might find in those museums and in those archives. So let me tell you now how you can go about visiting or taking advantage of the art culture and the museum culture at your museum if that is important to you. And I certainly hope that it is. And if you clicked on this video, I assume that it is. And again, I hope so. So there are 11 ways. Number one, find out what museums or archives are at your prospective campuses. So you can do this by visiting the website, of course, or you can just simply call. I prefer to call because I grew up in an era where we used the telephone and I just like to talk to people rather than just visiting the website, but both options are available to you. Number two, find out what museums are affiliated with your campus. So you may not be able to, you may not have any museums on your campus, but what if your campus offers discounts or free passes to the local museum? Or in the instance of Clark Atlanta University, your college may belong to a consortium. And so while you may not have a museum on your campus, you may be able to visit the museums of other affiliated campuses or other campuses that belong to that consortium. So think about that. Number three, ask if there is a cost to the museum. Keep in mind there should not be a cost. If you are a student there, you should be able to visit that museum for free, but you want to ask just in case. Number four, ask if there is a cost for non-students. So while you may be able to get in for free, your family members may not, or your non-student friends may not. So you want to ask that. Number five, ask what the hours are so that you can be sure that you can access the museum or the archives when it is convenient for your class and your work schedule. So, while I do believe that you should absolutely visit your campus's museum, please don't leave the campus without visiting your museum. You have to understand you are a student first. So, if that museum is not accessible to you after class or after work, then that might be a problem for you. So, you may want to ask if those hours are convenient for you and make sure that they are about just checking the website or calling, like we discussed earlier. Number six, ask if they have exhibits that reflect your interest. So they may have standing or permanent exhibits, which may or may not reflect your interest, but ask them if they have those, have some traveling exhibits or some visiting exhibits that may actually reflect your interests. Number seven, ask them if they have some exhibits that reflect your academic major. Again, this is very important. So, if I were studying, as I was 2 years ago, studying archives and artifacts at Alabama State University, their museum and their digital archives was ideal for me. I was able to find most of what I needed through their archives and their museum collections. So ask them if tell them your major and ask them if they have exhibits or resources that support your major. Number eight, ask them if they have exhibits or resources that reflect your personal heritage. So I don't think I need to elaborate on that, but it can be very important to you, particularly for students who are underrepresented in higher education, such as Native American students or international students or Black students, depending on the campus. So that can be very important. And if they don't have or they don't prioritize bringing in exhibits or curating exhibits or having permanent exhibits that represent you, you may want to think about why that might be, and if you whether or not you want to even enroll in that college or university, because as I discussed in, I think it was Thing 22's video, artifacts matter. Artifacts tell you what administrators will not tell you about the institutional culture. Number 9, ask if they have docents and when those docents are available. Now, I did not know what a docent was until about mm, 7 years ago. So I'm going to tell you what a docent is just in case you don't know. So a docent is a guide, a museum or archive guide, and that person can walk you around the museum and educate you about the museum exhibits and artifacts. So some museums have docents. I would say most do, but some of them don't. And you will have to be your own guide, or you may have an interactive guide or a digital guide. But if having a docent is important to you, as it is to me, then you want to ask that question and ask when they are available. Number 10, ask them, do they have interactive exhibits? So you all are digital natives, I assume. I am not a digital native, so I really don't need interactive exhibits. In fact, they can be overwhelming for me because I am accustomed to visiting the museum in silence and observing the artifacts in silence, because that's how I grew up. But for you all, this is an important question. So you want to think about or ask them, can I use my iPhone to listen to any information about these exhibits? Do you all have QR codes that I can photograph or scan? I shouldn't have said photograph, but scan and get more information on this artifact or this exhibit. Do you have headphones that I can listen to, or do I need to bring my own headphones to listen to the different museum exhibits or the interactive exhibits? So, those are questions that you want to ask. And then finally, number 11, you want to ask them what is needed for entry. So, while it should be free for you to enter the museum and visit the museum and tour the museum or the archives, you may need your student ID in order to get in, or you may need some sort of code, or you may just be able to just walk in. So you want to know that so that when you arrive, you can just walk in and enjoy yourself and not be inconvenienced. So that is all on this topic. I really hope that it helps. I thank you so much for listening, and please go to college.